This was an amazing year for television. There are so many good TV shows, and despite my best efforts, I still couldn't get to all of them. But I tried. I really did. Total, as of writing this, I will have watched 60 different TV shows. Out of those 60, 54 of them were shows that aired between January 1st and December 14th, which for me was this year's cutoff. This was an important year for TV, also because we got to see the first few shows emerge from the second wave of the streaming wars. And in a way, the final half of 2019 has a different environment for TV than the first half did. I signed up for Apple TV Plus, and I have not signed up for Disney Plus. After some disappointments with Hulu, I have dropped it. Amazon, Netflix, and HBO I have retained access to, despite Amazon only really having stuff in the months of October through December that I was really interested in. Year after year, we say this because it continues to be true, but there is more TV than ever, and it seems impossible to keep track of it all and to keep up with everything. Next year, I doubt I will be this thorough because 60 TV shows is a lot, but it was really fun this year to dive into TV, watching, enjoying, and navigating this changing landscape we call TV. My list ranks seasons of TV as a whole. I do take the entire series into account for context, but for the most part, the seasons or seasons airing during the year are judged mostly on their own. To qualify personally, it must have aired at least one episode, just one episode between December 14th, 2018 and December 14th, 2019. The show must have aired with a fixed set of episodes, so no soap operas, over a fixed schedule, so no YouTube channels that just sort of air whenever they want, or on an actual network, so no web series that exists solely on YouTube. This year, I have a core 5, which are ranked, and 10 runner-ups, which are unranked, listed in alphabetical order of show title and an honorable mention. Originally, I had planned on having a top 10, followed by a runner-up 5, all ranked, and the reason why I changed it this year was that this year was solid. And after the first 6 to 7 shows, I concluded after thoroughly racking my brain that they could be in pretty much any order and I could be satisfied with it. What made the number 6 show better than the number 15 show was sort of small, and that their respective strengths and weaknesses couldn't easily be balanced out. Also, before we get too far, this recap has mild spoilers. Sort of impossible to talk about them without leaking something. Some shows I say more about than others, and that just means I have simply more to say about them than others. Honestly, you should just jump into any of these because all of these shows are fantastic, and I recommend every single one of them. And if you want to stop the video right now, or this podcast sort of thing, whatever, I don't blame you. Hit stop, watch some of these, go for it. Have fun now. Honorable mention, Making Perfect Pizza, Season 1 on Bon Appetit. Almost nobody will have heard of this. It is also the only unscripted show on this list. You might wonder why this series, which is available on YouTube, is even on this list, but it has a fixed number of episodes, 5, with an additional prologue and bonus content. It premiered on the Bon Appetit channel, unfortunately only available to a small portion of the people who have Roku, Apple TV, not Plus, Amazon Fire TV, and Android TV. And it has a fixed schedule with each episode on the channel airing all at once. It qualifies. It gets an honorable mention because despite my love for it, I cannot tell myself that this show is objectively better than the following shows I will list out, and these shows did not make the list. Living with Yourself, True Detective Season 3, Into the Badlands, Catch-22, Big Little Lies, and more. It's a lot. Despite that, it is quite certainly a show that I have watched and rewatched multiple times, with my love for the show and the channel growing fonder and fonder. Side note, I am also a moderator of the Bon Appetit subreddit. I love Bon Appetit. Is my love of it potentially clouding my judgment, pushing another good show off the list? Yeah, probably. It's a personal list though, and this is an honorable mention, and I feel like that is very generous. So, enough of that. What about this show makes it so damn good? Well, it's a cooking show, and for the longest time, I haven't really loved cooking shows. I remember sitting in front of the TV at my grandparents' house when I was younger, watching my grandma watch Martha Stewart and Yan Kung cook, thinking to myself, how the hell is she enjoying this? I told myself for years that it's probably because I couldn't taste the food. Enter Brad, Molly, Claire, Chris, Andy, and Carla, our 6 heroes who have been tasked with the following. Making the perfect pizza. Not just a pizza, the perfect pizza. Now, obviously, you can't please everybody. Unscripted shows like this one benefit from the clarity of a structured premise. So what they did was they broke it down. First the dough, then the sauce, then the cheese, then the topping. And then in the final episode, they finalize the toppings and make the perfect final pie. They bounce ideas between themselves, changing, dialing in, discarding, doing whatever they need to for this perfect pie, all while being their delightful selves. There's no unnecessary drama, but there's struggle, there's desperation, doubt, but ultimately success. Their final pizza, despite it being different than any other pizza I've ever had before, I can't imagine a more thoroughly thought out pizza. All the chefs work well with each other and are professional, but they're also goofballs and they're lovable and they are themselves, and just makes this series, and I guess in the general scheme of things, the channel, one of the best things and one of the best shows I've watched this year. The Crown, Season 3. This season we saw a nearly completely recast show. Not just the characters from last season, Claire Foy and Matt Smith handing the torch off to Olivia Colman and Tobias Menzies, but also the stories of their children, whose lives are more completely explored now that they are older. This is partially why I think the show is called The Crown. It extends through the Queen's reign, but is also about the royals, the family, and their influence. Prince Charles and Princess Anne's stories are just as important as the Queen's, and the decisions made by every family member, every terrible event, and every prime minister has a rippling effect. The show doesn't have the same glimmer as it did the first 2 seasons, and it shouldn't. This is a rough decade to portray, and the series did brilliantly. Dark, Season 2. This might end up being the most perfect time travel story ever. We'll see. The third and final season will be the judge of that. But the way the writers of this show have seemingly laid out everything, planned everything, it seems to be heading in that right direction. I know this is supposed to be a review, but this kind of show will end up being judged for its, I think, 26-hour experience at the very end of it. And the only thing to do is watch it all and see what comes out. But besides the time travel, the performances are incredible, even more so when you see the actors portray the same characters at different ages. Just when you think they caved and they couldn't find anybody and they had to apply makeup to somebody, no, it is a different actor. Yeah, this show is incredible. Looking forward to the final chapter in Season 3. Dickinson, Season 1, Apple TV+. Dickinson wasn't the first show I think Apple wanted people to think about when they revealed their new network. Yet it was the best one that came out. Part of that might be how they released it, which was all at once, as opposed to other shows that they released, where they released 3 episodes and then weekly on Fridays until the end of the run. Also, since this is the first mention of Apple TV+, I just want to throw it out there for y'all who are trashing the show since it was released on this new streaming service. If you have an issue with Apple, I get it. Just pretend, though, that the show is on Showtime or Stars or FX. Personally, I wouldn't want to think that a hatred of company centered on smooth, rectangular, shiny computers would interfere with my love of TV, but that's just me. So, yeah, Dickinson is about a teenaged Emily Dickinson growing up in the 1800s with her family with the goal of becoming a great poet. Now, who is Emily Dickinson? If you remember anything from your 4th grade English classes, you will probably remember Emily Dickinson as that introverted recluse who wrote hundreds and hundreds of poems, and they weren't discovered until she died. And if you remember anything further, you might remember that she had her own fun way of arranging words with her own notation, and she was considered several decades ahead of her time. Anyway, so how do you make a recluse introvert whose poems you found boring and tiresome because she was almost speaking another language, partially due to it being the 1840s, and also partially due to it being Emily Dickinson? How do you make that compelling television? You talk about her when she's a teenager. Also, you toss in some modern slang and some Billie Eilish. Seriously. And what you get is a mouthy, smart-mouthed, death-obsessed, completely in her own head sort of Emily Dickinson. And the rest of her family and her lover are such well thought out characters, so well written, and it has been translated so well for the modern viewer. For All Mankind Season 1, Apple TV+. What would have happened if the Soviets got to the moon first? That is the question that starts the series, and it tries to answer as much as it can. The show is riveting. It is almost refreshing, in a way, to have an alternate history show that is not completely bleak. But maybe it's because I'm still reeling from the finale of The Man in the High Castle. It also gives me mild Expanse vibes due to its utilization of physics-based maneuvers rather than something that is more fantasy-based. The series has pacing issues. time jumping through and past events that would at least be important to the characters involved, but also important to the history that this show wants to create. For example, after taking pictures of the first woman on the moon with some water that they found, after that, they just time jump 10 years into the future to the first landing of the moon base, and then the episode ends. And then after that, we are focused on the moon base. And like, I would have loved to just see like the first landing of the moon base and setting it up, and maybe the characters who are helping do that. It's a big event. Why did they skip over it? It'll be interesting to potentially see this show venture into the deep future. Based off the pacing of the show, it's going because it could, and hopefully could go nearly anywhere. Kingdom Season 1, Netflix. One of the first shows I watched this year is about the Crown Prince discovering there's some sort of zombie-influenced coup in the works. It's campy in the best ways possible, and the zombies do feel legitimately dangerous. Well-done politics and fun escape scenes are all hidden in this mildly cheesy zombie flick. The Marvelous Mrs Mazal, Season 3, Amazon. This show is incredible. The cinematography, the scale, the production design, the performances from the actors, it's top notch. I see a bunch of lists, and I know why this show is number 1 and number 2 on people's list. But me personally, it's a little overwhelming. Just personally. Amy Sherman Palladino's style, much like Wes Anderson and Tim Burton, their styles are so distinct that I sort of need to get myself ready to watch it. And the breakneck wall-to-wall dialogue style of The Marvelous Mrs Mazal doesn't necessarily lend itself to binge watching for me personally, or just like watching quickly in general. I did have an 8-hour plane trip, and I tried to get through as much of it as I could, but I was just like, oh my god, this is so much. Anyway, this show is about one thing primarily. If you're unfamiliar, this show is about Midge Mazal's life being uprooted by her husband's infidelity, leading her to the world of stand-up comedy. And very much like hundreds of movies and show plots, this series is about people building themselves up from a world that was destroyed, usually by a man in their lives, in this case. This series has explored that with Miriam Mazal, but for her parents, her ex-husband, and her friends, this theme is all more apparent. It is all about how they approach their obstacles that make their struggles and triumphs worth it. And it's really good writing. It what makes the show so compelling. I really wish I could get more into this show. Mindhunter Season 2, Netflix. Mindhunter's sophomore season continues their dissection of serial killers, but it introduces them trying to implement that research in the field with the Atlanta child murders. Captivating writing and cinematography, everything that worked well from last season, but now it tries to take all those things that they were researching in that season and bring it into a real life scenario. The Atlanta child murders are and also aren't about one thing: race. Mindhunter makes it very clear that there are two understandings that are in conflict with each other: that the Atlanta child murderer is white and that the Atlanta child murderer is black. There's little physical evidence, and even in the end, when they actually catch the killer, the only decent evidence is that after they arrest him, the murders stop. But despite the lack of evidence, there's only history and there's only research. And with respect to the search, both of those could seem flimsy in the opposing view. It's tough, it's frustrating, and it's exactly what the show needed. These ideas of psychology and serial killers need to be tested, and this was a brilliant way to show that they still have a long way to go. I'm just going to say it out front. This was probably the show that I was looking forward to most out of the new shows coming out this year. In 2010, I watched a movie called Morning Glory. The film is written by Aline Brosh McKenna, who would later go on to make Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. The film stars Rachel McAdams as a recently hired daytime talk show producer for Daybreak, the in-universe daytime talk show. And it also stars Harrison Ford as a grumpy journalist. This is one of my favorite movies, and certainly one of the only movies that in the general realm of comedy, like rom-com sort of thing, that I genuinely love. So when news of Top of the Morning on Apple's new streaming service, a show about a daytime TV host caught up in a sexual misconduct scandal with Mimi Leader of The Leftovers as executive producer and director, Reese Witherspoon, Jennifer Aniston, and Steve Carell, I was impressed and I was very interested. Apple or not, I knew I was going to watch it. The morning show is about Mitch Kessler, who is fired from the morning show for sexual misconduct. The behind-the-scenes tension with Alex Levy, the other anchors, the producers, higher-ups are all focused around the Me Too movement, the toxic culture of the entertainment industry, and the integrity of journalism within daytime, especially within daytime TV. Brash, written with such catharsis and focus, and never too heavy without justification, the show does not disappoint. It is amazing. I love it. Brilliant performances from everyone, especially Billy Crudup and Gugu Mbatha-Raw. Looking forward to next season. Years and Years, HBO and BBC One. This miniseries is what Black Mirror fans probably wanted instead of season 5 of Black Mirror. This series projects into the future where politically, environmentally, and technologically things get wild and they get bleak. The show plays with the idea that our fears of runaway technological progress, political corruption, environmental destruction, migration, displacement, and all these things that we think will cause a post-apocalyptic world could all happen. They could be catastrophic, and we'd still be here. And yet, with all this worldly disaster, we focus on the lives of just one family and the things they do to get by in this terrible world and the things that they do for each other. And the ending is kind of cheesy, but otherwise it's a solid show that serves as a reminder that the world will just keep on turning. When They See Us, Netflix. The series centers on the Central Park Five, aka the 5 teenagers who were falsely accused and sentenced for the rape and assault of a jogger, pretty much because they were black. The show pulls no punches, shows the cruelty and the manipulation of the police and prosecution involved, showing the cruelty inflicted on them from the police to the courtroom to the prison and their lives after, from their point of view. This is based on a true story, and the true story is frustrating. It's criminal and it's upsetting that 30 years later that similar injustices repeat in modern times. When They See Us depicts a justice system that is biased and flawed, a police force that is abusive and racist, and a public culture unwilling and unable to perceive people different than them as people. As unfortunate and frustrating it is to realize that little has improved, that is exactly why we need media like When They See Us. Number 5, The OA Part 2, Netflix. I've talked a lot about this show personally in my own sort of space. And the OA's second and unfortunately final season is one of the most baffling experiences on TV right now. I have a category of shows that I like to call I can't fucking believe this exists. TV from its inception was designed to appeal primarily to advertisers, and now that the streaming age has been going on, more and more TV shows emerge that are crazy enough to fall into this category, shared by Hannibal, Into the Badlands, Dickinson, The Good Place, and American Vandal. All these shows are wild, genre-mashing, boundary-pushing, high-concept shows, and the OA is no exception, and in fact might be the gold standard for this kind of TV. Admittedly, part 1 of the OA was good, but it wasn't my favorite, mostly because I couldn't figure out if the show wanted to take itself seriously. For a while, it seemed to throw a bunch of concepts at a wall and see what stuck. The ending of season 1 also does that kind of tropey thing where it makes you wonder if the entire storyline was in the protagonist's head. Other than that moment, it was a wild season, and certainly one that stuck around in my brain. And the more I thought about it, the more I wanted it to be explored. Part 2 takes everything that makes season 1 good and amps it up tenfold. It expands into the world and scope without taking away from evolving and brightening its characters. Furthermore, it makes it crystal clear that there is more show that they want to make that a cancellation from Netflix will deny. This is a special kind of show that is very hard to describe, and you might notice that I didn't even attempt to. The best thing I tell people is to go in blind, because while it is a coming-of-age story, an alternate history story, a mystery story, a science fiction story, a spiritual story, it can only be so much of any of these things because they start to mix and become something different entirely. The Expanse, Season 4, Amazon. Aren't we glad we got this one renewed? After some delay likely to changing hands from Sci-Fi to Amazon, we have the 4th chapter of The Expanse. If anyone's wondering, yes, the cutoff of the year was based explicitly around when this show was airing. One of the draws to The Expanse initially is its stance on realism. The medicine might be projecting a bit, the drives and engines are a little bit fantastical, the speed at which Martians terraformed Mars is kind of insane, but it's all based in real-world science and physics. Toss in an alien blue goo that sometimes breaks the laws of physics, and you have some compelling TV for 3 seasons. The 4th season is the start of something different. They are on an alien planet. The events of the previous season, specifically the finale, have their consequences, rippling through the asteroid belt, Mars, and Earth. But most of the time, we are on this alien planet, which is called Illis. Most creative works would take an alien planet and just throw everything to the wall to make the world strange and otherworldly, like The 100 or Rick and Morty, for example. But The Expanse's Illis is so specific, and that credit is partially due to the book creators, but part of it is also due to The Expanse's insistence on realism and using those rules to create awe and drama rather than being limited by them. The series is growing into one of the best shows on streaming and is most certainly the best that science fiction has to offer. Number 3, Watchmen HBO. Just to say it up front, I have not seen the film, and I haven't read the original comics, and my familiar to that material is due to an Alt-Shift-X recap video of it, which you can just Google. But here we go. As The Leftovers was ending, it was revealed that Damon Lindelof's next project was to be the Watchmen series. And I'm not a superhero kind of person, but I do love Damon Lindelof, and I will follow him forever after doing The Leftovers and Lost. So I did keep it in the back of my brain. An old roommate of mine who was familiar with Watchmen comics told me that Watchmen as a whole is a deconstruction of superheroes and aspects of the superhero genre. And as someone who really liked Misfits for that reason, when it was airing, I was intrigued at the very least. The show is certainly a cousin or a sibling to like The Leftovers and Lost. Topics within The Leftovers explored in Watchmen, inexplainable grief, trauma, and Lost, which is parenthood, destiny, emerge out of Watchmen. But Watchmen tackles how each of those things tie back to race. The show is an alternate history, but some things are our history, quietly swept under the rug, brought to the forefront. Things that aren't often spoken about, brought to the surface. Regina King plays Angela Abar, a masked police officer by the name Sister Knight. She lives with her husband and adopted children in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The police force she is a part of tries to avenge the death of their police chief, going after the 7th Cavalry, and as Angela uncovers more about the 7th Cavalry, the more she uncovers about her family, her life, her trauma, and the trauma of those who came before her. Watchmen, both the source material and the reimagined sequel, explore the idea of putting on a costume to protect yourself. It's protection from your trauma, the trauma inflicted upon your parents, and the trauma inflicted upon people who are like you. The show explores these coping mechanisms and their benefits and harm to perfection, which is also leaving us wanting more from the world of Watchmen. Thanks, Damon. Number 2, Warrior Season 1, Cinemax. Warrior is based off the writings of Bruce Lee, produced by his daughter Shannon Lee, and has the showrunner of the show Banshee behind it, Jonathan Tropper. The show is about a Chinese immigrant, Assam, who comes to San Francisco like so many other Chinese immigrants in search of his sister. The search gets him roped up in the Tong Wars between the rival gangs, the Irish mob, and the San Francisco police. The show came into my radar right about when Into the Badlands was canceled. There was something quite special about seeing fight scenes like that take new life on an American TV show. Warrior is not Into the Badlands, and it isn't trying to be. Its scope is smaller but more focused. It's based off of real history, and its politics are not far off from what actually happened. And its fight scenes are different than the style of Into the Badlands, which uses elements of wuxia. They are reminiscent of Bruce Lee himself, and they should be. The show takes place during an era of America where it gets pretty crazy for Chinese Americans. The series does well in navigating the prevalent racism of the era, all while presenting kick-ass fight scenes, all performed by the actors themselves, which gives every moment of every fight personality. Bruce Lee's vision of a martial arts in the Wild West finally comes to fruition, and is freaking badass. Can't wait for season 2. Number 1, Chernobyl, HBO and Sky. This miniseries is about one thing, and it's the first word spoken in the first episode. What is the cost of lies? The show asks that question in the first 30 seconds and spends the rest of the series answering that question. Obstacle after obstacle, sacrifice after sacrifice. The backdrop of the show is the Chernobyl nuclear power plant disaster, which happens on the 26th of April, 1986. This series explores Jared Harris's Valery Legosov, Stellan Skarsgård's Boris Sherbina, and Emily Watson's Ulana Komyuk. and their efforts to contain the worst nuclear power disaster in human history. What is the cost to lying to the citizens of Pripyat? What is the cost of not revealing it's a nuclear disaster? What is the cost to close a valve of water leaking into a basement? What does it cost to clear a roof of radioactive debris? The answers are always told in lives, and we follow those lives from firefighter to war veteran to young boy to a child that was stillborn. The show explores how the explosion cost people their lives, but even more so, how the lies shrouding the disaster cost even more. This show is an example of simplicity done to perfection, exhaustively researched, detailed, and dramatic without exaggeration. This was a treat to watch week after week. And there you have it. This is my best. This is what I think personally was the best TV shows of 2019. If you are listening to this, it is because you reached the end of the video/audio. You could just listen to this, and I do want to say thank you for listening. I said this earlier. I probably won't watch 60 TV shows again because I did it and it was very excessive, and I don't want to do it again. But I just wanted to sort of fill my time watching some of the best TV out there, and I feel like I did it. So have a good one, and maybe I'll do another one of these next year. I don't know. All right. Bye.